Well, for the CEO perspective on how to create jobs in the U.S., I want to bring in two of the Chicago area's top business leaders, top CEOs. I've got David Speer here on my right. He's the chairman and CEO of Illinois Tool Works, which just reported second quarter earnings that came in and revenues, well, second quarters that came in very well. Revenues up 18%. Greg Brown is the CEO of Motorola Solutions. Greg, as you know, he's been on our program quite a bit. He sits on two of President Obama's councils on job creation. The latest is an advisory council on job skills. Recently announced that you will be creating, what, 400 jobs here in Chicago, Greg? 400
in Chicago sometime over about the next 18 months.
Okay. So the question that anyone is going to put to the CEOs is, why aren't jobs being created more here in the United States? What is going on?
Well, there's a number of aspects. I think first of all it starts with the basic demand. So while demand has recovered in the industrial environment significantly in the last year and a half, it was a very deep recession, required deep cuts, and most businesses are still not back to demand levels that would require significant additional headcount.
Earnings have gone up in many sectors, have been at record levels.
Right.
Why not?
Well, you would expect that given where we come from. I mean, the comparables now to 2009 in particular, and now as we move into 2011, the first half of 2010 are impressive in terms of growth numbers, but they're coming off very low bases. So the employment levels, if you look at capacity utilization amongst most companies, it's in the mid to high 70s. And to really be back, I think, in a significant hiring mode for most industrial companies, you've got to be probably in the mid 80s. So while we've seen unemployment come down somewhat, so far this has largely been a modest recovery from an employment standpoint, at least in the industrial markets. I think the other reflection is 2/3 of the GDP in the U.S. is consumer-based, and the consumer markets have not really come back. So while the industrial markets have, they don't employ enough people to reverse, I think, the unemployment trend.
Right, to change the consumer trend,
correct,
essentially.
Right.
Greg, when you hear comments like that, and obviously you being a CEO yourself, being on the Jobs Council, what possibly could the Jobs Council or could the government or the White House do to reverse something like that?
Well, I think it's also, demand is recovering incrementally, but it's about sustainability. And what we want is the elimination or minimization of risk and uncertainty. So I think the government, what they can do is pass the 3 free trade agreements that have languished for 4 or 5 years, get that done in a bipartisan way, show progress on the debt ceiling and reduce spending in a meaningful way. And for both of us, we've got to tackle corporate tax reform. We have the largest tax rate in the world now, effectively. So simplify the tax code, make the code 25%, eliminate the deductions, start to incent investment here in the U.S. That's what I think can be done.
That's been a big issue for you, David.
Well, it is. I mean, 60% of our revenues come from outside the U.S., and we, like many multinationals based in the U.S., end up with a lot of our cash trapped overseas. As a result of that, can't bring it back here very tax efficiently. But to Greg's point, I think more importantly, the overall corporate tax code in the U.S. is not competitive with the developed world, not the developing world. If you look at the corporate tax rates in Europe as an example, most of them are in the 30% to 25% range, so significantly lower than the statutory rates here. And I think, like Greg, you know, reducing the tax rate, eliminating a lot of the incentives that are in that today, coming up with a more simplified and consistent application of that, something that's sustainable, I think is important.
But the Obama administration would say, how do we know that if we cut taxes or give tax breaks, that really will translate into creating jobs? Where's the proof in that?
Well, I actually think that they're in support in conversations with...
You think?
No, they've said that. They've said, Geithner and the administration and the president himself has said, we will tackle corporate tax reform and cash repatriation in a holistic way. There's no reason for me to doubt that. I just think it's that's a long road traveled. It's very complex. In the meantime, at least get the more immediate things done. Reach agreement on the debt ceiling, stop the inflammatory rhetoric, strike a meaningful set of agreements short term on reducing the spending, and pass the free trade agreements. I think it's a stair-step approach, but we need to get things done and stop the talking.
Greg, I've talked to some of the members off the record on on the Jobs Council, and some have expressed to me that it's been frustratingly slow to get it moving. That there hasn't been enough momentum to get companies to hire. Would you agree with this?
Well, we are hiring. We are intending to add 400 jobs in Chicago. We've been very surgical in additions internationally. So I'm not suggesting that in the case of Motorola Solutions, we're waiting for some nirvana or solution. We have to manage the firm in a way that we think we can grow shareholder value and add accordingly. I'm just hopeful that the government can start to move crisply and step up the cadence of deliverables so we can accelerate the hiring process.
David, what would get you specifically to hire more?
Well, I think our business footprint is really based on largely putting our factories, if you will, where the market is. So for the U.S., for us to employ significantly more, it's demand. With that said, we've made some reasonable additions in our automotive business as an example here in the U.S. because the market has in fact recovered. And but there are other markets that we're in, like construction, they're a long way away, from recovering. So I think in balance, it's the end market demands in these various businesses that will drive employment levels higher. I don't think it's about as much about what we're thinking about in terms of reemployment just based on let's get more jobs, let's export more product. That's certainly part of it. But it's also skills-based. We need to be doing a better job of raising the skill levels of the people that are coming into the workforce. That's going to be an important element as well.
David, Greg, thank you very much for joining us here.